This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week we'll be talking about the 1939 Western Stagecoach, directed by John Ford.
Katie! Oh, Katie! Oh, Katie! Katie!
What's wrong, Chris?
My wife, Yakima, she ran away. When I woke up, she was gone.
The way you come busting in here, you think we...
Whoa.
Excuse me, kid. Come busting in here, you think we were being attacked. You can find another wife.
Sure, I can find another wife. But you take my rifle and my horse? Oh, I never sell her. I love her so much. I beat her with a whip, and she never get tired.
Your wife?
No, my horse. I can find another wife easy, yes, but not a horse like that. Mala Yakima.
Back in episode 37, I mentioned that Woody Allen was the most prolific director to date who had a film featured on this podcast. A new director has beaten him. John Ford, according to his IMDb profile, is credited with directing a total of 146 films between 1917 and 1976, a span of almost 60 years, some of which go so far back that historians are no longer able to find prints of them. Ford isn't primarily known for his volume of work, however, but for being the father of the American Western. Stories about Ford's early life are hard to come by, not because they were so long ago, but because Ford himself would often tell poker-faced tales out of school about himself. He once told an interviewer that he was born Sean Aloysius O'Ferna, when in actuality his birth name was John Feeney. Born to a poor Irish Catholic family in 1894, Ford's experience with filmmaking began when he moved to California in the early 1910s to work alongside his older brother Francis, who had begun a lucrative career with filmmaker Thomas Ince. With his brother adapting the name Francis Ford, John took advantage of the nepotism by giving himself the screen name John Ford, and soon he found himself both in front of and behind the camera. His most famous screen role, allegedly, was that of an extra as a Ku Klux Klan member in D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, although time has not been able to prove up the veracity of this fact. Young John soon began to outshine his brother on the set, and eventually his career eclipsed Francis's. Tales of how Ford's first directing job vary. Some say he was recommended by his brother to Universal Studios founder Carl Laemmle, while others claim that Laemmle saw Ford holding a camera during one of his surprise visits to the studio and recruited him for a new picture. Whatever the case may be, Ford became a natural behind the camera at a time when westerns were the bread and butter of Hollywood. Western fare didn't just consist of full-length feature films, but two-reelers and serials as well. Ford worked with some of the most famous and brightest early stars of the genre, including Tom Mix, Will Rogers, and Harry Carey. Ford's first crowning achievement, the film with which his majestic photography of Western landscapes became his trademark, was the 1924 silent epic The Iron Horse, about the building of the Transcontinental Railway during the establishment of the American West. During the months of production, the cast and crew lived in the brutal cold of the Western winter, without the luxuries that modern-day Hollywood would have to offer. A cast of allegedly hundreds were employed, including a number of Native Americans, some of which would double as Chinese railroad workers. Stories of Ford's insistence that everything on set be perfect became the stuff of Hollywood legend, from a set that could double as an actual blacksmith shop to crew members getting to watch their dinner prepared for them, starting with the actual slaughtering of the cow. The film finished over budget and behind schedule, but Ford's reputation flourished after its release. His brother Francis, unfortunately, quickly became a Hollywood has-been, while John could make whatever films he wanted. Ford's reputation in Hollywood didn't just include his talents as a filmmaker, but also his occasional use of alcohol. Sam Goldwyn once borrowed Ford from Fox for $50,000 to direct 1931's Aerosmith, starring Ronald Colman and Helen Hayes. Ford showed up drunk repeatedly on the set, then disappeared for days on end during post-production. Goldwyn sent Ford packing back to Fox, and even got a portion of his $50,000 refunded. It would have been a stunt that would have ruined the career of a lesser talent, but Ford nevertheless continued to enjoy his fame. He didn't drink often, but when he did, he wouldn't stop for days on end, often shutting himself up in his bedroom. After a while, his drunken bouts of depression became common knowledge among his usual cast and crew. It was in 1927, when Ford was filming Four Sons, that he noticed the work of one of the prop handlers named Marion Morrison, a law student and college football player. Ford found that Duke, as he was called, had the potential of a great screen presence, and hired him as an extra for some of his pictures. By 1929, Raoul Walsh was looking for an unknown face to star in The Big Trail, and hired Morrison at Ford's insistence. From then on, Marion Morrison was known to the world as John Wayne. When Wayne returned from making The Big Trail, he was disappointed to find that Ford snubbed him. As was Ford's custom, whenever one of his usual ensemble of cast or crew went to work for another director, even at Ford's own recommendation, he exhibited a kind of jealous betrayal. Ford wouldn't talk to Wayne for 5 years. But after their reconciliation, they were best friends and constant companions. In 1937, Ford bought the rights to a short story called Stage to Lordsburg for $7,500, and he offered the part of the leading role of Ringo Kid to John Wayne, which he graciously accepted. The film that would later become Stagecoach had a rough beginning, with Ford trying fruitlessly to convince David Selznick of Pioneer Pictures to produce the picture. At first, Selznick agreed, but then, much to the chagrin of his partner Marion Cooper, he pulled the deal out from under Ford's feet. Cooper resigned from Pioneer Pictures as a result, and he and Ford brought their treatment for Stagecoach to Walter Wenger, who agreed to produce it. Stagecoach is the story of several passengers aboard a stagecoach, what else, bound for Lordsburg, New Mexico. The threat of the native Apaches looms heavily, and in the film's climax, they attack the coach. The film is less of an action movie than a character study, however, as each of the passengers has his or her own backstory, some more unsavory than others. There's the pregnant Lucy Mallory on the way to see her husband in the military, alcoholic Doc Boone, meek whiskey salesman Samuel Peacock, lady of the evening Dallas, professional gambler Hatfield, and, of course, the gun-slinging Ringo Kid, played by John Wayne. The script varies significantly from the story it's based on. The names of most of the characters are changed, and a subplot involving Ringo Kid's thirst for revenge against Luke Plummer was added, as was Lucy Mallory's pregnancy. The Hays Code wouldn't permit the film to sensationalize the exploits of the alcoholic doctor or the mention that Dallas is a prostitute. Ford and screenwriter Dudley Nichols tweaked the script, and Dallas's occupation is never actually mentioned, only implied. They also made adjustments to Luke Plummer's character, making him a bloodthirsty murderer, which made Ringo's retribution more palatable. The Breen office, that's the board in charge of enforcing the Hays Code, gave in a little about the alcoholism, as there are very few scenes in which Doc Boone isn't nursing a bottle. John Wayne suddenly saw Ford in a new light during production. Ford was always lambasting him, calling him a big oaf and a dumb bastard, and allegedly once told Wayne, "Can't you walk, for Christ's sakes, instead of skipping like a goddamn fairy?" The treatment paid off, however, as this was the film that made John Wayne a household name and launched him into stardom. The film is also allegedly the first to feature the beautiful Monument Valley on film, a location that's been used since in everything from Easy Rider to Doctor Who. The stunt work was also remarkable for its time, with stuntman Yakima Kennett actually falling underneath a team of running horses before being passed over by the stagecoach. The stunt was filmed in one take. Afterwards, Ford assured Kennett that he would hire him for every action picture he did from then on. However, after Ford heard the editor later say it was the best Western he had ever seen thanks to Yakima Canet, Ford never hired him again. It was yet another one of his temperamental professional decisions. Stagecoach was a smashing success, gaining high praise from critics and audiences alike. It was nominated for 7 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Music, and Best Art Direction. Thomas Mitchell took home the gold for his portrayal of the drunken Doc Boone, and composers Richard Hagman, Frank Harling, John Leopold, and Leo Shukin all got the award for the film's score. It was a difficult year to compete, as top contenders were in the running like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Also starring Thomas Mitchell, by the way. He had a good year. Ford's career, of course, continued to flourish with films like The Grapes of Wrath, How Green Was My Valley, My Darling Clementine, Rio Grande, The Quiet Man, The Searchers, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, all of which are subjects for other episodes. For John Wayne, of course, this was only the beginning, and he too would go on to enjoy a long and illustrious career. What did I think of Stagecoach? Back in episode 23, I explained my ambivalence about most Westerns, so I really wasn't going into this with very high hopes. I was pleasantly surprised. I admit, however, being a little bored with the action sequences, but Stagecoach isn't an action movie, really. But for the Apache battle and its setting, it could hardly be called a Western. For me, the thrill of the film were the characters, each with his or her hidden agendas and secrets. Doc Boone, despite his drunkenness, comes off as a believable and likable character, which no doubt accounts for Thomas Mitchell's Oscar. The relationship between Dallas and Ringo Kid, that's the good bad boy and the good bad girl, is charming without ever coming across as maudlin or sappy, which was a common issue with movies of this period. Every actor involved gives an excellent performance, but for one. Andy Devine's stagecoach driver Buck is painful to see and hear. For some reason, the choice was made for him to deliver his lines with an aw shucks inflection that sounds like it was borrowed from a cartoon. John Ford was known for his landscapes, and the shot of the coach traveling through Monument Valley is truly memorable. All in all, Stagecoach is a very good film. That's all I have to say about Stagecoach. Tune in next week when we discuss 1927's The Unknown, directed by Todd Browning and starring Lon Chaney. In the meantime, feel free to email me any questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, and look for the podcast's Facebook page. Until next time, happy viewing.